The Albanese government on Friday woke up to what a lot of us have been saying for a while, and ordered a review into gender-affirming care for children. Now, unfortunately, what seems to have triggered all of that was Queensland announcing its own investigation, which was in turn triggered by a sexual health clinic in Cairns allegedly giving a 12-year-old puberty blockers without parental consent. But I suppose at least it's something. And of course, it was just days after 100 public figures, including former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, current Senators Matt Canavan, Claire Chandler and plenty of others, wrote an open letter to the Prime Minister calling for a national inquiry. The question now, Amanda, will be whether or not this is a genuine review, or is it a window dressing exercise where they come back and say, look, we fiddled with the rules a bit, we think this should be the national standard, but despite the rest of the world saying that, children shouldn't be given puberty blockers, we still think it's okay.
Well, this has actually been an issue that's been going on for a while in Parliament. So people have tried to put up a Senate inquiry on this, and it obviously got voted down. They never had the numbers. And what's interesting is that in May last year, Senator Kovacic and Senator Bragg actually sent a letter to Mark Butler and said, we need a medical inquiry in this. We don't want it to be politicised. We don't want it to be something that's on the front page of the news to say, look how wonderful I am. So I think it's really important that something legitimate happens and it's not used as a tokenistic tool to get votes, essentially. That's what we can hope. So hopefully this moves it forward, but not to be used as just propaganda.
It's funny though, Joe. Well, it's not funny. I mean, the rest of the world, and I've been prattling on about this, as have you, and most of us. The rest of the world has moved in the last few years when it comes to how children, in particular, should be treated for gender dysphoria. The UK had the Cass review that came back and said, well, puberty blockers shouldn't be given to children. The US has moved on this, and yet it feels like in Australia we are so far behind the rest of the Western world, and we either don't want to know about it, or for some reason we think we're smarter than everyone else. Yeah,
well, actually, it's because we kind of have been and are and were, and because we did not allow the level of intervention and invasive practices that the UK and the US did, and so there was less of so because we were more cautious and have been more cautious all the way through. Then there is less need for a backlash or a kind of correction. There is, I should obviously the disclaimer that my wife works for Equality Australia, and so they represent trans people. But the difficulty here, clearly, what happened in Cairns should never have happened. What happened in Cairns is against the rules in Australia. It should, you should never, no one under the age of 16 should be able to access any form of care of this nature, any intervention, without parental consent. And so clearly something has gone very, very wrong there, and that deserves to have a light shown on it and the book thrown at it if that happened. In the other cases, there is, I think, a case for, there's a case for puberty blockers which delay the onset of puberty as a way of being the most kind of cautious. If someone is absolutely 100% committed to transitioning and they say they are absolutely going to do it, you can give them puberty blockers. It delays puberty to make sure that once they're in adulthood, they can then make that decision as an adult without having, I suppose, become grown up into the wrong sex. And so I actually do think there is a case for that. But what has to happen, and this is a really powerful case that the Telly raised today, you have to make sure that it cannot be anything else. You have to make sure that it's not any of these other things, including a terrible case in the Telly, someone who had a huge amount of childhood trauma. There's been suggestions that the symptoms could be confused with forms of autism as well. So
that's why they need a proper professional medical inquiry.
So I and Equality Australia fully support the review. And fully support it being a rigorous medical review, completely independent of politics, and making sure that what we are doing is world's best practice that is based on the latest evidence.
And involving parents, because that's been another complaint as well, that parents haven't been involved in this, and so it needs to be, really politicians to stay out of anything to do with parents and their children in a lot of ways. I believe that, but parents need to be involved in this inquiry, not just doctors and professionals, but the parents, and we need to hear from them because it's their children.